Okay, we've got 1:30. Why don't we get started? Good afternoon, Research Methods. Welcome to Wednesday. This is the last Wednesday for us of the semester, and a couple of announcements. I went over these yesterday, but I wanted to make sure people had everything here on their schedule. Tomorrow is a very big day in our department. We're really excited about this, and we have something like this at the end of every semester. First, for those of you who might be going on in psychology, you might be interested in some of the upper level research that students are doing, and one set of talks will happen in room 403, which is right next door on this side, and that's going to be talks in cognitive psychology. We'll have about 2 hours worth of talks. And the talk type of presentation was one of the items that we had in our video for today. Hopefully people were able to watch that video. It took a different format. I used some of the software that I learned about at the Chicago conference and created a video, and you know about the poster format and the talk format. So here we have from 9:30 to 11:30 cognitive talks. I hope you might find those interesting. If your schedule allows, you don't have to stay for the entire session. You can come and go as you like, but we'd love to have you. Okay, we also have posters going on in what used to be the Welsh Hills Room, and that's now called Noble Hall in honor of our recent president, Dr. Dale Noble. And that's probably maybe of greatest interest for you, and the reason for that is many of you will go next into a 200 level research course, so that would be what you're going to be doing in about 6 months or so. And you might enjoy watching these poster presentations. We'll do a little bit of poster viewing later on today in the session, and also we'll view some PowerPoint slides from recent talks that have been given. At 3 o'clock in this room tomorrow will be my own students who will be talking about sensation and perception related research that they've conducted this semester. And then finally we have our psychology holiday party right across the hallway in room 406. We hope that you'll stop by, have some food, and see some other psychology students and see the faculty and staff. We'd love to have you join us for whatever time you can spend. Even if it's only a few minutes, we'd love to have you stop by. Okay, so lots of things to do on Thursday, December 12th. Any questions about the timing of any of that? Okay, then we get to more fun at the end of the day today. I will hand out the assignment that's going to be due on Friday. We'll have an article analysis that's due, and we'll give you the opportunity to read through that assignment. There are some very precise instructions there, and I want to make sure that we read them out loud before we go away. So at about quarter after, I'll stop us, hand out the assignment, and make sure that we're all on the same boat with that. I'll say this one more time. We're coming up on the final exam, which will be Monday in the evening, 6:30 p.m. in this room for these 2 hours. We've done this several times already. What is new here is I finally put down exactly what I'd like you to study for the computation. Remember that because of the conference situation, we had to cancel quiz number 3. So we're going to now incorporate some of the information from quiz 3. And this is the one new line from the other day. I can make this larger because I see some people are squinting to see that, okay? So what we'd really like you to focus on would be the regression and two-way between subject ANOVAs. Okay, that's going to be the analysis that we think will be most important for this final exam. There are Excel practice exercises. We've done all of these in class. They're color-coded, so you have the answer keys right there. You can copy and paste them if you want into SPSS. You have 2 ways of finding the appropriate clicks inside of SPSS. First, I have them in that day's PowerPoint that are listed there. Alternatively, you have the guide that many of you have been reading on the night before each of these sessions that would tell you what the clicks are. So you can copy and paste the Excel problems into SPSS, and you know what the correct answer is in Excel because it's color-coded right next to each of the problems themselves. So we'll focus on the regression set. We'll focus on the factorial ANOVAs, which we also call two-way between subject ANOVAs. In this case, two-way means what? Let's all yell it out. Two-way means 2 independent variables, okay? And we could have, in principle, a two-way within subject design. We could have a mixed design where one of the variables would be administered between subjects, one within subjects. But as far as our computation went, we did, which is actually the easiest of these, believe it or not, the between subject computation, okay? All right, so that's the final exam. Okay, one last bit. I thought what I'd do is just finish off the very final slide from yesterday. We got through almost everything except for this. We were talking about single case experimental designs, and we were contrasting these with case studies. Can somebody offer us a way of thinking about the difference between a single case experimental design and a case study? How are those different from each other? Okay, thanks, Janet.
Well, case study doesn't really have a whole lot of manipulability.
Okay.
So you are just
Okay. Right, okay, so that's the major distinction. Here it actually has the word experiment in it, so we know that we're going to be manipulating something. Okay, so that's one of the major contrasts. Given that we're not engaging in a manipulation for a case study, why do case studies have any value? Can anybody give us some conversation about that? What would be the value of case studies given that they're not experimental and cause and effect might be hard to establish? We had a couple of benefits that case studies can provide for us. Yeah, thanks.
Well, you can change, like, it can start a new form of therapy maybe.
Okay.
So like something that worked on a case study can work for someone else in the future.
Okay.
You can try it in the future.
Okay, right, so we might only have a very small n or even n of 1, but we might get some clinical innovation out of that. Katie also had her hand up a moment ago. Was that the same item that you were going to say, or did you have something else?
Oh, I was just going to say that, like, it gives you a chance to, like, falsify something, because, like, it's usually the case studies are, like extreme or, like, really
Yeah, yeah.
situations that, like, give exceptions to, like, theories that otherwise wouldn't have.
Okay. Yeah, really good. So sometimes the case studies are so extraordinary that they do falsify certain kinds of claims that could have been made, particularly strong versions of certain kinds of claims. I think I saw one or two other hands. Kip's got something.
Certain conditions in some case studies, like if somebody has a brain injury, you can't really replicate that.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
can't, like, make your subjects have a brain injury and then study that. It's just like you find someone with a brain injury. And
Yeah.
study that.
That's right, yeah. So for ethical reasons, sometimes we learn a lot through case studies that we couldn't, for ethical reasons, learn through experiments. There's no way we could get the Institutional Review Board to agree to some of these things, okay? Something else? I think that's actually a very good summary of the responses that we've had so far. Okay, also there are some limitations associated with these smaller n cases. And here, because of the small sample size, it's typically difficult to generalize. So we don't have much external validity. You get just a tad more external validity when you start going with the multiple baseline design, but still the external validity or your capacity to generalize is very limited with these. Also, it's difficult to show the interaction of many variables. And we talked about how in our research cycle, we're always trying to reconstruct the real world, at least a manageable model of it. And in order to do that well, we do want to see how multiple factors are interacting. And it's really hard to do that clearly when you've only got an n equals 1. You've got a much better chance when you can randomize things across people and across conditions, and you can see the interaction or the combined effects of variables. It's fairly hard to do. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I've not seen it done particularly well. So that's one of the other limitations. But one of the things we hope you take away from this course is an appreciation for diverse kinds of methods. There might be factorial kinds of designs, single case designs, which might be case studies or might be experimental in nature. Lots of different ways to learn about behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. Okay, any other questions or comments on the PowerPoint presentation from yesterday or the video from yesterday? There are actually two from yesterday, and we'll go into the second one in just a moment. But anything on this PowerPoint from 1210? Okay, I think that's enough on that. Then we'll put that one away. You might remember at the end of that one, what we did was I created this other video that was, again, using this new software that I just learned about. And we talked about in small n studies, you frequently are working with a behavioral record. So we have time on this axis, and typically we're tracking a baseline for some interval of time. And then we have an intervention, and we're looking at maybe, hopefully, an upward tick in some kind of pro-social behavior, or a downward tick in some kind of anti-social behavior. And in the video, I give some different examples of cases that are relatively clear to interpret, and others that are behavioral records that are more difficult to interpret. How many people remember seeing that in the video, that there were clearer cases and less clear cases? Okay, wonder if we can do this. We haven't done it in about a week or so. I wonder if we can get 3 or 4 people to come up to the board and jot down a behavioral record and show us a pattern that has maybe 2 people can do a relatively clear interpretation, and maybe 2 other folks can show us a trace of a behavioral record that has a pretty unclear interpretation. Any volunteers to come on up? This is not for a grade. Okay, thanks, Kev. If you'll come up, and then maybe we can get a few folks back there. Anybody else want to grab a pen and draw either clear or unclear behavioral records?
Unclear beverages.
Okay, if you want to do an unclear one, thank you. So we need 1 more unclear one and 2. Okay, thanks, Giselle. Thank you. If you want to go maybe to the back, okay, if you can work your way around that camera. So a few other folks. Anybody else want to come up and do one here or one back there? And Giselle, did you have an idea about a clear one or an unclear one? What would you like to do?
A clear one.
Okay, so we need one of each still. Can we have volunteer? Mira, thanks. Can you come on up this way? And we'll let you pick which one you want, clear or unclear.
I'll do unclear.
Unclear, okay, so I think we've got the two unclears over here. And Giselle's got a clear one. One more person going to the back for a clear. So we'll have unclear up front, we'll have clear in the back. Anybody want to help us with it? It's okay if there's some redundancy. Any other takers? Okay, thank you, Jenna. And I think there's a green pen back there. Sorry if the camera's in the way. Yeah, if you want to walk around, that's fine. Okay. Wow. Wow, really, really good. By the way, I'm still learning how to grab all those tools. When I'm on the iPad, those videos that I created were created entirely off of an iPad and nothing else. And there are many, many tools around where I'm working. And I frequently have been clicking on the wrong one. So thank you for bearing with me in the videos. But I think you got the point, and it's apparent that you've got the point. So I wonder if we can have Catherine just walk us through. So this one we're going to call unclear. And what we mean by that, informal word, unclear, it's difficult to interpret what's going on here. Can you just help us out with how that...
So the reason why this one was unclear is because usually like with the clear graphs, when the intervention hits, you can see like a significant like going up or going down if it was already going up. But in this one, it's going down, so you don't know if the decline is still attributed to the intervention or if it was just originally still going to keep going down.
Yeah, so let's pretend just for a moment we're all therapists, and we've got this kid who's got an antisocial behavior, and we're trying to drive it away. Well, it looks like as we're observing it, it's going away. Then we do an intervention to really make it go away, and it does come down to 0, but we don't know whether that's us or the continuation of a pattern. So nicely stated. It's hard to know what to do with this, right? You probably want to go to another kid and see what happens when you have your intervention. Okay, there's another one over here that we say is unclear, and I have to say that looks like a remarkable recounting of what I had up there. So thank you. Who had this one? Yeah, okay, great. So and I'm just drawing these things on the fly, but it looks like you really got that. So this is another one that's unclear. And Mira, I wonder if you can talk us through this one.
Well, because the first part of more the intervention is so up and down, it's very unreliable.
Uh-huh.
And difficult to kind of track.
Right, yeah. I noticed that the unreliability is happening over a brief time, then here's another brief time, so maybe that's a longer period of time where we've got an uptick, but it isn't really clear, right? I mean, it seems like the probability of this one turning around is much greater than the probability of this one turning around. And we have to draw the line somewhere. If you had to guess what would the next mark be here or over this range, it's probably still going to be downward. Over here, we don't really know which way it's going to go, although the recent trend is pretty good. So this one is not quite so obvious. Okay? Wow. Okay, and I see two clear ones back here. So I think green was Giselle, is that right? Did you have the green one?
Yeah.
Okay, can you walk us through that one?
The baseline behavior isn't entirely steady, but the steady.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So what the intervention was turned on and
Yep, okay, right. So this is all done at some level very qualitatively, but I think we get it quite saliently that this is going to be a pretty clear uptick. I would be moderately impressed that this was causal. Now we could quibble about that, and we'd have to know more about the details there, but that looks pretty persuasive. And we had Jenna on this one. Okay.
So the baseline behavior doesn't have a lot of variation in it, but it is a downward trend.
Uh-huh.
And so the fact that it reverts to an upward trend is pretty, like, it's a little bit, it's pretty persuasive.
It's pretty persuasive. Okay, and maybe that's the best we can do with these, right? Pretty persuasive. Just by a show of hands, let's call this, we'll call this one, I don't remember which number or letter that was. We'll call that A, we'll call this B just for the moment. But look at those two, and we'll ask you which you find more persuasive. How many people are more persuaded by A? And how many people are more persuaded by B? Okay, so we have a mixed bag. Off the top of my head, I'd be a little bit more persuaded by this one because, if anything, it was downward, and that's a real uptick. But these are both pretty persuasive. Okay, so behavioral records can be good news for us. They can help us in interpreting some outcomes from single case experiments. On the other hand, sometimes we get pretty uninterpretable data. You might see this, by the way, throughout tomorrow's presentations. So I love that our class is wrapping up at about the time that students who are just maybe one semester ahead of you are actually conducting research here in the department. As you might know, after you finish this class, when you're going into the 200-level research courses, you begin running people through SONA. Who remembers doing the SONA experiments? Okay, so now you pass through this class, and then if you stay in Psych, you begin running the Psych 100 students. And sometimes you wind up with data that look like that. Sometimes you wind up with data that looks like this. You'll see mixtures of data tomorrow in the posters that you might attend and the talks that you might attend. But that's science, right? That's what we do. If we knew the answer, we wouldn't bother running these experiments and these studies. All right. Any questions or comments about behavioral records? Okay, why don't we go on to our next item then. And just for fun, what I'll do is open this up. We won't go through all the slides on the 1211 PowerPoint, but a couple of ideas here. We were talking about communication in psychology, and we're talking about PubMed. How many people had used PubMed before for other kinds of, every once in a while we have a PubMed article, but not all of us have done PubMed searches. So what I'd like to point out about this is a distinction between typical undergraduate experiences and typical graduate school experiences. During most of your 4 years during your undergraduate time, you spend a lot of time consuming information and learning a lot about different kinds of fields, how they know things, what they know, and so forth. You're really, most of the time, in information consumption mode. You're receiving information, okay? And that's important to do. When you get to graduate school, particularly in the sciences, it's more about information production. So if you ever wondered where the textbook that you have or the textbook that you had in Intro to Psych comes from, it's because lots of graduate students just a couple of years older than you are performing studies like this all the time. Frequently on Psych 100 students, the equivalent of their SONA. Okay, that's where much of psychological research comes from. In fact, that's true for really all of the sciences. Your colleagues over in chemistry and biology, when they get to graduate school, they'll begin producing information. So today, we're kind of starting out with information reception. We're going to be reading about information that's already produced in PubMed. We're going to do a couple of exercises, and then we'll take a look at the APA-style reports that are used to disseminate information on recently acquired new data when we're producing information. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we go to a browser? I'm going to go to Firefox, open it up, and we'll see if we can just come up here to Google, and we'll put in PubMed. P-U-B-M-E-D, and you'll probably come to something that's highlighted. It says Home for PubMed. And if you get that far, can we all raise our hands? Okay? All right, and we'll do just a couple of PubMed searches, and we'll see what kinds of different search terms we might use, different search strategies that we might use. First thing, as I mentioned, sometimes you know the name of a researcher that you're interested in. So just for kicks, why don't we look to see if I have anything in PubMed. So we'll put in Nestor Matthews. That's how that's spelled. It has a O-R and 2 T's, and you can hit Enter or Search. And it's a bit of a mystery to me. I actually have a few other publications that aren't showing up here, but hopefully you got 12. How many people got 12 of these? Okay, right? And then if you click on this one, we'll do the most recent of these. You can see there we are, Department of Psychology, Denison University. Some of you might have known Andrew Clement. He was a student of mine who just graduated. He's now in psychology graduate school at Notre Dame. Okay, so all kinds of folks, some of whom that you know are in PubMed. And this is a database from the National Library of Medicine, the National Institutes of Health. They fund this stuff. As I mentioned in the video, they make this available to everybody in the world for free. And I think it's wonderful that some kid growing up in Africa, he might be in a challenging community in Africa or in Asia or a challenging community in the US, has unlimited access to the latest biomedical research, behavioral research. Really great. Really great that the nation is doing this. I think it's very exciting. Okay, we can also search by topics of interest. We can search by year for particular publications. You can search by the journal title and so forth. So we might do something like this. We might say Nestor Matthews, and now you can have and terms. So we need the conjunction of two things. Why don't we say Nestor Matthews and 2012, okay, to see if we have anything written by somebody named Nestor Matthews in 2012. Now, in principle, there could be more than one Nestor Matthews. I have a cousin by that name, okay? But here we are, and there is something for 2012. I think I had an off year in 2007. I think nothing came out that year. Let's try 2007. Okay. Low productivity for me in 2007, right? Nothing came out at that time. So you can have the conjunction of these terms, okay? All right, the other thing I thought I would do is remind you of something that we did on the first day of class. Who remembers taking this information from the first day of class? All right, I'm going to leave this up for a moment or two, ask you to find your name on here, and you have listed some of your, at least then, interests in psychology. And what I'd like you to do is see if you can use PubMed to find some abstracts or two. Given that you have maybe an interest in educational psych or you have an interest in neuroscience, why don't you see if you can find an abstract or two and see if you can use 3 different kinds of search terms. You might, for example, use schizophrenia, and you might use a year, and you might use something like, what else could it be? You could use an institution like Harvard or Yale or something like that and find out if anything was going on at Yale in that year and the topic of interest. You might come up null and then try a different combination, different years. But see if you can use 3 search terms. And we'll see what kinds of responses people get. And if you get something, and maybe you can just call up a title of your work, a title of the abstract, you can raise your hand and just share with us what title and what your search terms were. Okay, Katie's got something.
I searched emotional disorders and children in 2000.
Okay.
One came up that's called preterm birth and behavior problems in infants and preschool children, a review of recent literature.
Okay, all right, really good. And you can probably see that before you got that far, they might have told you that there are 75 articles that meet that criterion, or those criteria, right, okay? Somebody else, maybe we can take just a couple of other examples, and we'll see the diversity of research that we have. The other, Katie, has something.
I looked up childhood development and mood disorders.
Okay.
And I got a bunch, but one of them was the role of early life stress in adult psychiatric disorders, a systematic review according to childhood trauma subtypes.
Okay. Does it say where that was done? Sometimes, underneath the authors, sometimes they give their affiliation. Maybe it doesn't say. Okay. Okay, that's fine. And how many hits did you get? You said you got a bunch, but that was... Okay, you had 2,000, right? So one of the challenges is if you're going to, and in just a little while, you'll see when you begin to produce your knowledge, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. First, nobody will publish it if you've reinvented the wheel. And so how do you know what the wheel looks like, so to speak? You have to go through lots of stuff, and there was 2,000, so we'd probably need still more search terms to get down to something a little bit more manageable. Why don't we take 1 or 2 other examples? Anybody else? Yeah, Brittany's got one in the back.
I looked up educational psychology inner city in 2000, and I came up with 11 hits.
Okay.
One of the articles that is actually kind of interesting is the impact of HIV positive speakers in multi-component school-based HIV/SB prevention programs for inner city adolescents.
Okay, so that's bringing in speakers to see if that has an effect. Is that what I understood? Okay. Okay, really good. Can we take 1 more just to get some? Okay, we'll go with Rachel.
I looked up developmental psychology in the University of New Hampshire in 2010.
Okay.
And I got 3 results. And one was the effects of adolescent victimization on self-concept and association.
Okay, now isn't that rather remarkable that it seems like a really specific, but 2010 University of New Hampshire, and then whatever the other qualifier was, and then there it is, right? There's maybe more specificity. Did you get more than 1 hit, or is that the 1 hit that you got? Okay, so you got 3 hits with all of that specificity, right? And then sometimes we think we have a lot of specificity and we get 2,700 hits, okay? So anyway, lots of fun playing around in PubMed. I hope that in the years to come, I'll be reading about articles from you in PubMed, and I'd love to be able to point at this time, a couple of years from now, I want to be able to say, hey, you know what, Nina was in class, and look what Nina has recently published and is now in PubMed. Available for children and adults all over the world 24/7. What an exciting time to live in. Okay, questions or comments about how we might use PubMed in order to receive information about psychology? Okay, all right. Real good. Why don't we go over then and start talking a little bit about the PowerPoint that was addressing the production of information. Now we're talking about APA-style reports, so we'll dial down to there. APA-style research reports, and a couple of things that came out about this. I mentioned something that I think is fun about authors. Anybody want to help? I made a political point about authors. I wanted to give you heads up about politics and authors. Can somebody help us understand what that was about? What did I mean when I was talking about politics? Yeah, okay, thanks, Maddie.
The order of the authors.
Okay, the order of authorship.
Like how the first person listed is usually the most, or the most.
Maybe the lead author is assumed to have the greatest responsibility for that piece of scientific work, okay?
They started doing it just in alphabetical.
Yeah, some industries or some fields of science have said, okay, we're going to get away from all that politics, we're just going alphabetical, right? Okay? All right. So that's kind of interesting. Just so you know, in case you go to graduate school on any topic and you're co-authoring something, it can be advantageous to talk with your co-authors before you get to the publication point about who's going to be first author and why. If you have the conversation way before the work is done, then there aren't any hard feelings when we start having the conversation about who goes where. I have to tell you, I've been remarkably lucky. My own professors, when I was a graduate student, were remarkably generous in helping me out when there was a question of who should be first. Sometimes it's really clear who's first author and who isn't. Other times it's ambiguous, and my research advisors were very generous to me, and in turn I try to be very generous to my own students. But not everybody has that situation. Sometimes the lab boss really wants to be first author on anything that comes out of his or her lab. And that's actually considered a reasonable position to hold. Not the only position, but a reasonable position. Okay? All right. All right. So one other point that I didn't make in the video that I'd like to make here is that we have these different components. We have the title page, but then we also have the abstract. More on that in just a moment. The introduction, the method, and results and discussion. Some people have used this. Let's all do this together. Let's draw an hourglass that comes down like this and then goes out like that. That's our hourglass. So we usually start out with some really broad phenomena. I'm interested in children's mental health. That's a really big category. But I'm more interested specifically in children who fit this particular kind of demographic characteristic and who have had this particular kind of problem. So we're now coming down a little bit more precisely, and we begin to develop the literature. Science is not done in a vacuum, and we come to a very specific kind of question that remains open. And from there we build on our methods, and we offer our results. And then we summarize the results in the discussion, and we begin to look again more broadly about what this might say for children's mental health, generally speaking. So we have that kind of a format. Okay. All right, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to go back to the abstracts, and can somebody remind us why I was saying in the video that the abstracts might be the most important component? Anybody remember what point I made about that? You could argue that they're all important, but the abstract has one really salient feature. Go ahead, Brittany. Okay, and that might be right. So it could be that I've had maybe perhaps thousands of people look at my abstracts, but maybe only a few hundred are ever going to read any portion of an article, and maybe only a handful will read the article in its entirety. Usually I assign my articles, so my students have to read my articles, okay? But the number of folks who are reading my articles in their entirety outside of my students is going to be very, very small. But a lot of folks will see the abstract. You just took a look at some abstracts, right? So this might be the only component that the majority of your audience will ever see. So the abstracts can be really important. That said, if you'll break out of this with me, and I'm going to ask you to do something we haven't done before. If you'll follow me out to the S drive, I'll ask you to go to the S drive for our course and see if you can find a Word document. So Word is in that blue icon, and it says up top, sorry that you can't read that, it says up top, Sample Denison Psychology Student Abstracts. So this is out on the S drive in our resources. Maybe I can point it out for you also. Here it is. Okay? If you organize by type, it'll be the one all the way down on the bottom. Sample Denison Psychology Student Abstracts. Okay, and just by a show of hands, how many people are able to find that? Okay, so we all have that. What I love about using electronics this way is I don't have to print out all of that. We can save some paper and just use electrons rather than using atoms. Pretty powerful stuff. Okay, here we have 4 abstracts. All of these were written. I hope I've analyzed them, so they're no longer showing who wrote these. But these are students who have written these abstracts this semester in my class, and this is just the first part of a maybe 15 or 20 page paper that they've written for the APA style report. Remember that you're going to wind up doing somewhere between 4 and 6 of these during your time at Denison, these APA-style reports. And these are the abstracts that were conducted as you and I were having this course. My 300-level students were running research on Psych 100 students through SONA, and these are the abstracts that they've written for their semester end projects. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read each of these, and while you're reading them, I'll just project up here what we said an abstract will typically have. One paragraph, the problem being investigated, a brief summary of the method, maybe the participants, summary of the data, typically without numbers and maybe some implications. Okay? We'll let you read these, and I'm curious to have you reflect on how you think our students have done in communicating to an audience some of these themes. So we'll let you read through, and then we'll take any questions or comments that you might have. I'll give you several more minutes. This is not light reading necessarily. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to read some of these. Okay, so you can continue to read if you want, but I think a few folks have looked up as if they've completed reading, at least several of them, maybe not all of them. So these were abstracts that were done on the topic of sensation and perception. You might notice that there are some sensory-related issues, perceptual issues, issues relating to attention, and so forth. So those were some of the topics that we had. And now these students are writing their abstracts. I'm interested in what you thought maybe were some strengths or weaknesses or other observations that you have of any variety. Okay, thanks, Jenna.
One of the strengths was that I think all but the first one ended the abstract with talking about how like further investigation will be needed to show.
Okay.
So kind of that's an implication right off the bat. People are knowing that they maybe came to an understanding of the phenomena, but further research is needed. So it sets up.
Okay. Okay. One of the many tones that scientists, I hope, will strike is exhibiting some humility and some modesty. So any one article, any one research set of studies is going to get us hopefully some new information, but it won't be the end of the investigation. And so we hope that they exhibit some modesty in doing this. Okay, something else. Somebody has some ideas about strengths or areas for improvement. Maybe you found that these were completely unintelligible. They were written maybe in a manner that's too specialized. This frequently happens for students who are getting into an area. They learn some vocabulary, they master it, they learn some more vocabulary, they master it, and they start using it. And if you're in on the in-joke, that vocabulary works. If you're a smart individual like you who's not in on the in-joke and you don't know that vocabulary, then the whole thing just passes you by and it seems unintelligible to you. How many people had that? They had some difficulty understanding these because they weren't so intelligibly written or there was some vocabulary? Okay. Hannah, in your case, was it mostly vocabulary as a limit or were some other things that were?
It was like the first one, I don't know what the assignment effect is.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So there was an...
The other ones explained it. And like the second one, I think in the first sentence.
Yeah.
Or in the third sentence, it explains what mental rotation is.
Okay.
And that's just like a sentence in there. It's the definition, which was helpful.
Okay.
But I didn't understand the first one because I don't know what the assignment effect is.
Okay, wonderful, right? Okay, so that's an important point, is that when you become a producer of information, you have to somehow get very metacognitive, and by that I mean you have to figure out how are other people thinking. If your audience does know what the Simon effect is, you're golden by starting out by saying, oh, the Simon effect shows this effect under that. But if you don't know what the Simon effect is, then that can't be your first sentence, unless it's the Simon effect can be defined as, right? Okay? All right, some other comments or questions that we have. Go ahead, Janet. Yeah, thank you.
Just on abstract 2, I thought that the first/second sentence could have been like not in there, just because they start off with the field of sensation and perception, places an emphasis on aspects of ability in visual processing tasks.
Okay.
And that's just very, it's kind of sounds like the class, definition.
Okay.
Rather than, and then it doesn't get to what the point of their study was to the fourth sentence. So maybe
Okay, so maybe that was too broad. Okay, maybe that was too broad, and that's the other problem that you've got, okay? And I can tell you that I've been a poster presenter, I've been a person who's given talks, and I'm sure that I have angered members of my audience in both of those directions. Somebody said, you started out with something I didn't understand, and somebody else said, get to the point. Okay, and so striking that balance when we're producing any kind of writing is always difficult, no exception here in psychological science. One or two other comments that anybody want to share on either strengths or weaknesses or how these might map onto what we generally hope to get accomplished in an abstract? Up here? Any other comments? Okay, thanks, Natalie.
I think they do a good job of explaining other methods.
Okay.
It has to be explained in a way where it can be like replicable, right?
Yeah,
So,
okay.
It's done clear enough that you know what's going on and you're not like
Oh, okay, well, thanks for pointing that out, that they've done enough in their method that you might get some idea about replication. And that's actually an important point when you're writing your APA-style report. You want to provide enough detail in the method section for replication without including anything that you wouldn't need for replication. So it's an important point. Okay, all right. All right, so why don't we do one other variation on this? We have, I think, a few more minutes I want to spend on the next kind of production, where we're talking about producing information in psychology, and you can use APA-style reports to do that. You can use posters, and we'll have a poster session tomorrow. We can also have people making PowerPoint presentations, and they're giving talks along these lines. So one more time, if you'll join me out on the S drive, hopefully you can find something out on the S drive in our resources folder that says something like this. It's a PowerPoint file, and it's called An Examination of Gamers versus Non-Gamers. Okay, and we're dealing with visual enumeration. So hopefully you can pop that open. I'll see if I can find that with you. Here it is. Okay, an examination of gamers versus non-gamers. And when you pop that one open, please raise your hand so I can make sure that you found it. And people are finding the materials. Okay, and this was a talk. The way this typically goes is the PowerPoint slides that you're about to leaf through over the next few minutes would be presented in 12 minutes, and the remaining 3, this is always very tightly governed in time. There actually is a referee there with a timer, and the timer is seen by the public and by the speaker. And after 12 minutes, a bell will ring and that talk is to come to a conclusion, and then we have 3 minutes worth of questions. So that was the format that we did when these students were presenting this, and that's what the format that we will use tomorrow in this room at 3 o'clock when our 300 level students are making the presentations. And if you go on to become a psych major, you'll go through that drill also. You should recognize that you're very fortunate to have that drill. A lot of students around the country never get the chance to write an APA-style report. They never get to make a poster presentation or a talk that's timed in an APA format and so forth. Denison students do multiple examples of each of those. Okay, I'd like to give you a few minutes if you'd like to now leaf through the examination of gamers versus non-gamers. So this would be a talk format rather than a poster format, still roughly following APA style. We'll let you leaf through these, and then we'll take a couple of comments on potential strengths or weaknesses in this presentation. In case it's not obvious, visual enumeration is the capacity to look at something and say, those are 4 objects over there, and there's 5 over here, 3 objects over there, just by glancing without actually having to count. Go for just another moment or so. Okay, I recognize that some folks are still flipping on through. That's okay, but hopefully you got some feel for what it might be like to have a 300 level research presentation summarizing the work that you've done with maybe 1 or 2 other students here at Denison. All the stimuli here were made by those students. They went through the IRB process by themselves. They recruited the participants by themselves. They analyzed the data by themselves. You might see some familiar looking graphs. You might notice that they have some factorial graphs here. And probably somewhere in here, they're giving you F values, and they're telling you about power and partial eta squared or eta squared and all of that. So hopefully these are now looking familiar to you. Some questions or comments about what was maybe strong or not so strong here? Okay, thanks, Natalie.
I guess for my liking, I thought some of the slides had a lot going on.
Okay, okay.
Like especially with like the red and blue, I don't know, like to me.
Yeah, it's maybe too visually busy. Okay, I think that's fair. An interesting thing when it's your turn to stand up and speak, and the professor is encouraging you to try to speak extemporaneously, try to speak off the cuff, right? A lot of students are nervous about that, so they like to get things down on their PowerPoint so they can read, and when they lose their place, they can just read it to us. That's not what the audience wants. The audience wants a more spontaneous presentation. So sometimes there's a mismatch between what the speaker can do and what the audience wants to hear. And it takes a while to be able to learn how to speak well around your slides. We never stop learning how to do that. Okay. Any other comment or questions? These were maybe a little bit busy. Okay, we are at 2:15, so we could say more about this, but why don't we do it this way? Why don't I hand out a copy of the homework, ask you to take one, pass it down, pass it over, and then we'll see if we can get somebody to read this to us. There's some precision in the instructions that I want to make sure everybody understands before we go running off, and then we all have to do this by email. We don't want to do that, so please take one and pass it down. Who didn't get one? We're too short over here. Pass that way. Okay, and the instructions are a little bit long. We have one extra back there?
Yeah.
All right, just thank you. Do we get a volunteer reader to take us from the note? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Meg. From the note, and then we'll have you go all the way down if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, please, if you wouldn't mind taking us. Yeah.
5 hands draw 5 pairs of scatter plots, 1 pair for each of the 5 persistent cities. A for B. Shown in the article subset. Select the right scatter plots of each pair should reflect respectively persistent belief about ability tests. Left scatter plot. And what is the value of the label each axis and also label each scatter plot as either persistent belief left scatter plot or empirically observed right scatter plot. Each scatter plot should contain a best fitting linear trend of instructions equations of the form y equals mx plus b, place y and x for the appropriate variable name, and an estimated R statistic value. You do not need to report dx nor p values. You may make up the data points, equation values, and R values. I'm simply looking to see the appropriate pattern in each case based on the information that's there.
And if I can interrupt there, so we're going to have 5 pairs. Here's a pair, here's a pair, here's a pair, here's hand drawn. Okay, and these are now going to be the persistent belief in this column, and then what's empirically observed over here. Okay, if you would please continue. Thanks, Meg.
2. Carefully read the section entitled Test Scores and FDS, which is relevant to our recent PowerPoint discussion on multiple regression. Then, by hand, draw 2 separate Venn diagrams that each contain 3 variables: SAT scores, college GPA, SES, social economics. The left Venn diagram should reflect the persistently that SAT scores demonstrate college GPA and their association with SES. The right Venn diagram should capture the author's conclusion about the empirically observed relationships among these variables. Be sure to label your left Venn diagram as persistent belief and the right Venn diagram as empirically observed. Again, I'm only looking for the appropriate patterns in your Venn diagrams, not a precise match to the quantities listed in the article.
Okay, just to remind you, Venn diagrams are these overlapping circles. In most cases, we're going to have sets of 3 of them. Sometimes we'll have a set of 3 on the left, a set of 3 on the right. If you would keep on going, we're almost there.
By hand, draw 1 Venn diagram that contains 3 variables: SAT scores, college GPA, and PHA, personality, habits, and attitudes. Your Venn diagram should capture the pattern described in the section entitled Standardized Measures of Personality, Habits, and Attitudes. 4. This extra credit problem is optional and will require creative and critical thinking beyond what we have discussed in class. Carefully read the section entitled Predicted Bias. Then, by hand, draw 1 scatter plot in which college GPA is plotted as a function of SAT score with high SES public squares versus low SES closed circles with a perimeter. Your scatter plot should contain 1, not 2, just 1 best fitting line that shows a literally significant positive trend.
Critically, your scattered plot must also contain a data pattern that would be expected if cognitive ability tests, like the SAT, were inherently biased against low SES students. Note, the authors cite evidence that cognitive ability tests are not inherently biased against low SES students, so this extra credit problem is merely hypothetical.
Okay, thanks. We don't have to read that bottom bit, but thank you very much, Meg. I appreciate that. So now this is a 25-point assignment, but I'm actually giving 30 points here. There's a 5-point extra credit opportunity. If you want to do it, you don't have to try it, okay? I am going to grade that one relatively strictly, and I'd really like to see your critical thinking on that one, but you might want to give it a shot for 5 extra credit points. Okay, thank you, Meg. And that brings us to 2:20, so we're ready to go. Look forward to seeing you on Friday. We'll talk about this in class. I hope you enjoyed the article. I think it's nicely written, and I think it's an important topic. More importantly, hope to see you Thursday at all these events or whatever ones you can come to. It'd really be great to see you there. Have a great day.